been at the cutting edge of whatever we mean by moderate Islam, and those words weren't even used until very, very recently. This is a guy who well before 9/11, he had two books that are very, very important, Islam, The Search for Meaning, and Islam, A Sacred Law. These are things that people need to read. And it's so easy to take one comment out of context. Any of us who've been in the media, any one of us who've been interviewed, you can take a statement and turn someone into a radical and turn someone into a terrorist. This guy has been at the highest echelons, State Department, FBI. He has spoken in the Aspen Institute. He's spoken in Washington Cathedral. This is, I mean, it's really crazy, and that's another part of the story that's very scary. I mean, the community board, before anything, voted this 15-0. There was an amazing conversation. In fact, there was a request of Daisy Khan, could you put a 9/11 memorial inside of what is now Park 51? And he said, of course, we're planning on doing that. And this got stoked by a very small group of people. And then what I would say is an irresponsible national leadership, whether it's Gingrich and Palin and then a certain element of the media. And what's very scary is what was a local issue that was a non-issue. This is a group of people led by Imam Faisal that has been 10 blocks from there for the last 27 years. This is a complete non-issue. And so what it really says is what's going on in America.
I mean, what's very interesting, as Nate Silver points out, well-known pollster, the plurality of Manhattanites are actually for this.
Even now.
Even now,
right.
With the swirl of negative publicity. You also have the issue of conservatives attacking, and yet you have, who are very concerned about states' rights. This went through this long process. Among them, the Landmarks Commission said they're not going to make this a landmark, this building, that it could be rebuilt. Can you talk about what it means for conservatives to talk about Imam Faisal as a secret radical?
Well, I think what happens in a hyper kind of 24/7 media is, as soon as words like radical, as soon as words like extremist come out, they have a life of their own. And because we're on a tinderbox right now in the country altogether, when you have 20% of Americans unemployed, or even off, they're not even looking for employment anymore, you have so many Americans in very, very serious pain, when you have so much change happening in a country, sociological and cultural change and religious change, and when you have so much going on, there's a kind of tinderbox, and there's a lot of fear and a lot of anger, and it calls for incredibly mature leadership, by the way, political leadership and religious leadership. And it's so easy to stoke those fears for political capital, and that's what we have. So you put out the word terrorism and extremists, and it's attached to him forever, forever.
I want to bring in Professor John Esposito into the conversation. He's the University Professor of Religion and International Affairs at Georgetown University and is author of several books. Most recent is The Future of Islam. Professor Esposito, I want to play a clip for you. It's the proposed Islamic Center near Ground Zero has generated a flood of absurd comparisons from the right, including Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich.
Those folks don't have any interest in reaching out to the community. They're trying to make a case about supremacy. That's why they won't go anywhere else. That's why they won't accept any other offer. And I think we ought to be honest about the fact that we have a right, and this happens all the time in America. Nazis don't have the right to put up a sign next to the Holocaust Museum in Washington. We would never accept the Japanese putting up a site next to Pearl Harbor. There's no reason for us to accept a mosque next to the World Trade Center.
Let me ask you, what would happen, do you think, if the Ku Klux Klan wanted to establish a memorial at Gettysburg?
Well, I don't know. Nothing's happening in Lower Manhattan.
What do you mean you don't know? They wouldn't get to first base. Nobody would put up at the Klan building a memorial anywhere, much less Gettysburg.
Well, you're right there, but where is the public outrage? If we don't have it for Lower Manhattan,
the public outrage is there. You're just not seeing a march in the street.
That was Rush Limbaugh talking to a caller. Professor Esposito, you've said that Islamophobia needs to be taken as seriously as anti-Semitism. Talk about these clips, what the right is saying, and the hate it's whipping up.
Well, I think it's very clear what's happening here. Note how Rush Limbaugh talks about the Ku Klux Klan. So he's equating what? American Muslims and the vast majority of Muslims in the world with the Ku Klux Klan. What's clear here is a notion of collective guilt and punishment. Let me begin with just a brief quote from an American Muslim who's also a prominent professional on this issue. It's a matter of principle and not the personalities involved. They may be doing it for all the wrong reasons, but we're being attacked simply and only for not knowing our place, not being sufficiently sorry for a crime we didn't commit. It's like we need to assume some collective guilt for 9/11 and act accordingly. And I think that when you see people, for example, Newt Gingrich, here's somebody who's old enough from the South, can remember the problems of racism and civil rights. He also is reportedly a Christian. In fact, some reports say he's a Catholic. He's got to remember how a theology of anti-Semitism led to a history of pogroms that ultimately led to the final solution. And much of that was based on collective guilt, let alone what we did to the Japanese. The fact that folks can say the things that they're saying now, and that media will often publish them, they would use words that media would never allow if one were talking about Jews or African Americans today, and most probably Italian Americans. What we're seeing is the tip of the iceberg of a social cancer that's been growing in America for the last decade.
Rabbi Kulak.
Yeah, I actually agree. I think very important. When you hear terms like those folks, and when it's, forget about the tropes using Nazi Ku Klux Klan, because that is so clear. The more subtle, very dangerous language is when a very important politician, we're not talking about Newt Gingrich, we're not talking about some low-level congressperson, we're talking about someone who has a global stage and is considered an intellectual heavyweight within the Republican Party.
Who will possibly be running for president.
When he uses words like those folks, well, wait a second. Imam Faisal and his community aren't those folks. They had people who got killed in the World Trade Center because actually those folks live in that neighborhood, which happens to be our neighborhood, called Lower Manhattan, called New York, called the United States of America. And that is incredibly insidious, even more insidious than the tropes of Nazi and Ku Klux Klan.
You lost family in the Holocaust.
Yeah,
Amy, this
I
is
lost
Keith.
a lot of
Can
family.
Dive in here?
Yes. Let me just hear Rabbi Kulak talk about the Holocaust for 1 minute, and then we're going to go to you, Congressman
My father
Ellison.
came here in 1938 from Poland. He came here to escape the Holocaust. He came because of for religious freedom. And here we are, you know, my father's 81, and he's watching this and can't believe this. Because if you, I mean, and this is where the professor was right, just take out the word Muslim and put in the word Jew, and you see that this strain, which has always been a part of America, and especially when things get tense, and especially when people are under tremendous stress, and we are, it's very easy, right, to blame somebody. And now it turns out, you know, Muslims are getting blamed.
Since 9/11. Since 9/11, they're carrying the cross.
Right. Since 9/11.
We're going to go to break and come back. Congressman Ellison, we'll go first to you. This is Democracy Now! We're talking about the controversy swirling around the Islamic Cultural Center that is planned to be built in Lower Manhattan. We'll be back in a minute.